Good good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel on climate finance and corruption. Many might be asking why climate finance. As you know, in the Caribbean, the small island developing states and low-lying coastal states of the Caribbean region are exceptionally vulnerable to climate change. We are, in fact, experiencing climate change. We're living the experience. We've seen the devastation over the last few years, the increased intensity of storms, increased frequency of extreme events, and overnight livelihoods are wiped out, economies are more or less wrecked. So we have, as a region, as an imperative for build climate resilience. And the way to do that basically is to get the resources to invest in building the resilience that we need to do. Uh, Resources has always been a challenge, and in 2009 they developed at the Cancun conference, the developed world promised to have climate finance for developing countries to do that, mitigate and adapt to climate change at a level of 100 billion US per year up by 2020. 2020 has come and gone. This finance is there, but certainly we will depend over the next decade on a tremendous input of climate finance to help us to build that resilience. And the consequences of corruption, of the finance not being used in the way it was intended, would mean for the Caribbean destruction of our way of life, destruction of our ecosystems, basically destruction of life itself. And so we have to ensure that when climate finance is accessed in the region, the outcomes are as anticipated, and we need to ring fence that finance and make sure that it does what it was intended to do. So in a nutshell, climate finance is going to be a very important part of our armory as we move forward in building climate resilience and dealing with the issues of corruption would be at the forefront of the region's agenda. So we welcome this opportunity to give visibility to this very important issue as we move forward. We have this morning a very experienced panel. First, we have Ibrahim, who is the head of the integrity unit of the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund is the mechanism, the financial mechanism for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so it's a critical institution as we look at the whole issue of climate finance. We have Rennie Valladares, who is head of the Integrity Office at the Central American Development Bank. We can more or less designate her as coming from a donor institution, just like our own Caribbean Development Bank. And we have Michael West, who is an anti-corruption specialist, has worked with several organizations on this issue, and will share some of those experiences with us. Unfortunately, our other panel member, Dana Schran, who's from Transparency International in Germany, is indisposed and will not be able to join us this morning. We wish her a speedy recovery. And without further ado, I would like to call on Ibrahim from the Green Climate Fund to kick off for discussion on this issue. Ibrahim?
Thank you, Dr. Trotz. It's a real pleasure to be here on this panel. And if I may first of all extend my gratitude to the Caribbean Development Bank to Dr. Toussaint Boyce in particular for this invitation. We've had a long history of collaborations on exactly the work that we do. Let me start by sort of setting the context. I think it's always important to have the right context about the discussion that we're engaging in. So the climate crisis, as you know, is a global problem that indeed threatens the viability of our planet. And it's a problem that's here and now. As you said, Dr. Trotz, it's really threatening the existence of states, and small island states, and in the Caribbean. Many communities are facing its adverse effects, and policymakers are in a race against time to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. About the Caribbean, I mean, given its geographical context, this is a region that's particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, including sea levels projected to increase along most coasts, associated with increased coastal flooding and erosion, ocean acidification, intensity and duration of marine heat waves are projected to increase. And of course, tropical cyclones, storms becoming more extreme, but also conversely with observed increases in droughts. It's in this context that climate finance is an indispensable tool that empowers communities to combat the detrimental effects of climate change and to build strategies and development pathways that promote climate resilience and equitable growth. Now, the GCF provides access, as you have said, Dr. Trotz, for countries to climate finance, including for small island developing states in Latin America and the Caribbean. Just a few quick facts on the GCF portfolio in the region. We've got 46 approved projects out of a total of 190 GCF projects. And by thematic areas, 12 are adaptation projects, 20 are mitigation projects, 14 are cross-cutting, both adaptation and mitigation. 33 of the projects are public projects and 13 are private projects, private sector projects. And the portfolio to this region represents $3.13 billion out of a total of $10 billion of committed GCF financing. And so this kind of underscores the importance of the region within the climate financing portfolio of the GCF. The projected impact of projects that are currently undertaken by the GCF in the region is estimated to impact 128.5 million beneficiaries. So, all said, the GCF pays a very strategic attention to small island developing states in Latin America and the Caribbean. And obviously, this demonstrates an increasing demand for international climate financing. The significant volume of investments makes climate funding vulnerable to integrity risks. Hence, the role of accountability, transparency, and good governance must be emphasized across operations to ensure that communities achieve maximum benefits and maximum value from GCF projects and programs. And I will speak on an emerging theme that's really important in the discourse on integrity in international climate financing, and that is the risk of maladaptation in projects. We recently issued a thematic brief, which was launched at the COP26 in association with CABEI, and Rennie is here. You know, many thanks for the support of CABEI in developing the thematic brief, as well as Transparency International, Water Integrity Network, the University of Witwatersrand, and the Global Change Institute. The focus of the thematic brief is identifying the risks of maladaptation in projects given, of course, the fact that we are required to show a 50-50 split um, um, between mitigation and adaptation projects, and a significant, increasingly significant amount of resources are now channeled towards adaptation projects, which are key. In her opening remarks at COP26, Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, and I've taken to referring to her as the Prime Minister of the world. She spoke terribly eloquently at the conference, and really represented the urgency of the mission, as well as the dire situation of small island states and other vulnerable communities. And in her opening, she identified three gaps that need to be filled. One is on the climate pledges and the NDCs, and secondly is on the and Dr. Trotz referred to this a few moments ago, on the $20 billion shortfall in the $100 billion a year financing commitments that have been made. But the third thing she referred to was on adaptation financing and meeting this gap between mitigation and adaptation. And she said the failure to provide financing, and that of also the issue of loss and damage, is measured in lives and livelihoods lost in our communities. And that's a stringent reminder to the international community about the need to manage better the split between mitigation and adaptation. Now, having spoken about the importance of adaptation, I think just a word on the thematic brief itself. Maladaptation results from a number of I'll speak about the nexus between integrity failures, corruption, and maladaptation. Now, corruption obviously skews decision-making processes in climate adaptation projects, and this is often enabled and driven by inequitable power, alignments, strong vested interests, opportunities for rent-seeking, and short-term political agendas, the capture of resources and power, opaque decision-making, and exclusion from the decision-making of vulnerable groups, minorities, women, and youth, etc. And it diverts funds from their designated purpose and subverts their decision-making process. The result of the impact of corruption in adaptation projects is that it then subverts the end goal of achieving adaptation in the communities that suffer the effects of climate change. And it is for that reason that we're paying particular attention in collaboration with CABEI and with Water Integrity Network and Transparency International and other partners to address the risk of integrity failures in adaptation projects. Let me just give a brief account of what we have done at the GCF in the last 5 years since the integrity unit was set up. What we set out initially to do was to build a policy framework that addresses every aspect of the field of anti-corruption. And that integrity framework is anchored on a policy on prohibited practices, where we set out the prohibitions against certain practices that enable the misuse of resources. GCF resources are crucial, they're vital, they're limited, and they need to achieve the purpose for which they're assigned. So we built also policies around anti-money laundering and terrorist financing, which is really a current issue, particularly in the region, but also across the world. We've built out standards for implementing these policies, addressing the need to apply the FATF recommendations and to apply the necessary safeguards around to avoid money laundering and the financing of terrorism. We also have built out a very robust whistleblower protection policy. And what this is to provide protected reporting um, for communities, for beneficiaries, for staff, and for the general public, to enable us to essentially receive reports without the fear of retaliation or harassment or intimidation. We then also have built out a policy against sexual exploitation and abuse in projects, knowing that that is potentially a reputational issue that could damage the reputation of an institution and even threaten its very credibility and existence. Um, and in addition, we have now had an administrative remedies and exclusions policy, which provides the remediation, the sanctions aspect of our integrity framework. Now, all of this creates a safeguarding environment for the use of GCF resources. We share these standards across all of our partners and all of our accredited entities. We have sought to build a global network of integrity amongst institutions that we work with, and we strive to provide global leadership in climate finance integrity. We also have developed innovative tools. I won't go into a lot of detail, but one of our tools, and I think we spoke about this a few minutes before we started the program, is leveraging on technology in order to deliver a credible early warning system, a red flagging system. And we apply that tool using project data and crunching it through a statistical model that generates the results based on a ranking of integrity failures in projects. We've tested it and the tool works. We very much look forward to the opportunity to share it, to popularize it, if it's of benefit, so that it can be deployed widely across all of our entities and all of our projects. So having this is just an overview of what we've done and what we're continuing to do. We've done a lot around creating, as I said, networks of integrity. We started an integrity forum, which brings together our partners. Of course, COVID has sort of put that to test recently, but all of our efforts are done primarily in collaboration. We believe that we all belong to a network of partners and institutions that seek to build and to safeguard the interests of beneficiary communities. And so we look forward to further collaborations with the institutions we currently work with, also with the Caribbean Development Bank and other institutions that we look forward to working with. I'm happy to stop here and then perhaps leave room for questions, and then we can provide further elaborations. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Ibrahim, for that very comprehensive overview of the GCF modalities to deal with this issue. And there is obviously a tremendous amount of capacity building that we would have to follow up in the Caribbean. And I hope that at the end of this, we would have decided on a way forward in some of those. It's reassuring, however, to see the efforts that are being made to more or less allow us to avoid this risks arising from corruption in the climate finance arena. Now, over to you, Rennie. Give us some of your experiences on the ground in the Caribbean, how possibly we've been reacting to this, and what are your experiences so far?
So I would love to give away some takeaways. I think it's really relevant. Ibrahim mentioned how we are all partnering up and working around in order to address this issue, not only corruption, but the rest of prohibited practices, collusion, coercion, obstruction. And if you combine those with the efforts that are executing agencies or population are looking forward for their projects in order to mitigate climate issues. So I think that raising awareness is super important. But I think that for great problems, there's always minimal solutions, or mainly addressing solutions from a technical point of view. Time is key. So if you have a project in which you're not deserving the time it has to take for all the studies, technical cooperation that you need prior to project initiation, implementation, take a step back. Probably if you haven't taken the time to address all the issues regarding the red flags around the project, you haven't taken the time to talk to the population, you haven't taken time for the beneficiaries to address to the institutions that will probably will be partnering in the project or implementation of operations in climate change. So time is really relevant, it's really important, but it's also taking into consideration the lessons learned. I think that we talked about how lessons learned have to be taken into consideration. Having a correct auditing and supervising, it's super important. But I think one of the things that's top essential and a key is also your procurement processes and having a correct due diligence. And due diligence, it doesn't have to take that much money. Sometimes it depends on the level of the project. But if you're an executing agency in which you don't have the probability to have a great technical assistance for a due diligence or have the resources for a great analysis, most of the support for a great due diligence is free. You can run checks in free basis of the United Nations. You can check around who are the people participating in your project, and addressing red flags is super key. So I would leave it to Michael and the rest to give a hands up on what other takeaways would we like to address in this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Rennie. I think the whole issue of transparency and the involvement of our population and people who will benefit as a result of the intervention in project concept, project development, right through to the implementation. That partnership is one of the critical elements going forward to basically ensure that corruption doesn't have a chance. Public awareness and transparency, I think, are two important factors in the whole continuum of activities. Michael, we are looking forward to your presentation, having actually been in the field and having dealt with this issue firsthand. So we welcome you now to make your presentation.
Thank you, Ulric, and thank you, Ibrahim and Rennie, for your own contributions. So while I've worked for anti-corruption agencies in the past, I've done a lot of research on new trends in corruption and corruption prevention. And I've most recently focused on a subset of the corruption problem in climate finance, and that's connected to the risks around lobbying. So in particular, lobbying that is aimed at influencing the kind of policy portfolios that different governments want to put together. So we know that now is a very key moment in the development of climate change policies. Many governments have not yet bedded down the kind of policy choices that they want to make. We know from the previous COP conferences, but also a lot of work by civil society organizations who've done freedom of information requests, that private sector organizations, but also civil society organizations themselves have been very active in trying to get access to policymakers and to influence the kind of policy platforms that actually get adopted that are related to mitigation, adaptation, and the kind of expenditure that happens around that. So the paper that I recently worked on for the U4 Anti-Corruption Research Center, which is available on their website, is Lobbying, Corruption and Climate-Related Development Finance, the Stakes for International Development. So we focused on international development, and in particular that meant donors, but also recipient governments. So that would include the governments of many of the people who are watching this presentation today, because we think that, first of all, lobbyists are coming for you, that especially donors who support policy development programs, which are very big around climate change at the moment, adaptation, mitigation, but also the large development banks. There are potentially a lot of pressures by especially private sector actors, but also others, to influence the kind of policy that's developed. We also think that international development, including donors and recipients, are really uniquely placed to deal with the risks because of some of the things that Rennie mentioned earlier about procurement, that there are actually some very easy things to do around lobbying that can draw on current practices in procurement. So the policy questions of interest to parties are really much more beyond, the kind of crude, how should we cap emissions that is the stereotype of oil and gas firms, for example, because it relates to things like what types of renewables should be favored, how can energy consumption be reduced, what is the optimal low carbon transport options for a country, how can a transition deliver secure jobs and decent livelihoods, and what should be the pace and scope of transition. So all of those things come together, and there are a lot of very clear interests and actors around each of those questions. The basic problem with lobbying is that when it is done in an exclusionary manner, some stakeholders get more access to decision makers than others. So this has really been highlighted at some of the recent COPs, where large oil and gas firms have effectively paid money that has allowed them the kind of access that they would not otherwise have had. And in the paper that I wrote, these examples are detailed. Of course, when that access is granted, it means that there is inequality because other voices get ignored. And then the other really key problem is that if the kind of influence is driven by a profit motive, it means that the climate interventions that result from certain kind of policies become shaped by profit motives rather than reducing greenhouse gases, for example. So in our paper, we looked at examples from Australia, the United States, France, Ghana, and Tanzania of real cases where there had actually been lobbying, which shaped the kind of access that was given, the kind of inequality that was created, and we surmised the kind of policy outcomes that resulted because of that. So really, just to give you some takeaways about what can be done. And these are the key analytical points. First of all, we think that lobbying laws and regulations are important, but and we certainly support their introduction, but they do not. We should not rely on them alone, and they are insufficient on their own to control lobbying. Many countries do not have lobbying laws, and those that do have laws often have a very difficult time enforcing them. They have a very difficult time trying to find clear evidence of some kind of breach that could result in either a code of conduct violation by either the lobbyist or a political figure, for example, or somebody in a donor organization. That can be extremely difficult to prove. And therefore, the chances of any kind of court processes or conviction can be very low. So laws and regulations are important, but don't rely on them exclusively. Inclusivity. So this is very important. But for people in the international development field, you need to hang on to what you know, especially from the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. People in development, good development knows about inclusivity. We know about transparency. We know, I'm quoting you, Ulric, from earlier, you talked about public awareness and transparency and accountability. All of that is already built into good development. So if you have that kind of impetus that is based around the SDGs, for example, that will serve donors and recipient governments well in trying to keep sight of what is important in developing climate-related policies. And then the third thing is management, manage engagement by lobbyists. And in this respect, I think you can really use the kind of tools that are already available from procurement. So in procurement, in international development, we are very familiar with the idea of regulating communication. You meet, contractors or aspiring contractors in certain venues at certain times. You don't go out for long, alcoholic lunches with them. You record the kind of interaction that you have. You communicate information at the same time. Where there's a query, you communicate your answer back to all parties at the same time. This might be under a tendering arrangement, for example. So in the paper, we detail this we provide a lot more detail about this, but I think you can really use those kind of things that donors and recipients working in international development already know to really pick up and manage lobbying in a way that reduces the risks for corruption. So I think I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, panel, for laying the groundwork for brief discussion in the remaining time. I think I want to start, particularly following Michael's presentation, with two questions from the audience, which are connected. The first one is tone at the top. I think is about talking about example is essential in combating corruption. But how can governments set the right tone when many have been embroiled in serious issues, meaning many have been compromised? And the other one related, is there an estimate of how prepared Caribbean countries are to address this issue of corruption? And the questioner would like to know if it's we have to legislate, if there's legislative gaps that we have to address to deal with this. Who would like to go off on that?
I would like to talk about the tone at the top. I think, yes, it's relevant and in many lectures and documents, but it's not always the way that it is. Sometimes things come from down to the top, and we as beneficiaries and of population have the right to stand up. And I think that is part of the movements also of climate change. Don't expect your governments to change, but if population changes, they have the key of making and raising hands. Like for in the case of development banks, there's always reporting channels. There's always a way in which population can send out report allegations and make these development banks aware or the donors of what's happening, and we take measures around what's so yes, tone at the top is really relevant, but we should not stand alone and just expecting for people at the top to have to expect what beneficiaries need. As Ibrahim mentioned, this is something that has to do with lives. This is something that has to do with making a change for our planet. And so, definitely, if we don't see a tone at the top in our governments or in national executing agencies, we as populations have the right to raise our hands. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's move on. How does reporting of wrongdoing, corruption in climate finance and maladaptation work? Is there any difference from reporting corruption generally? Does climate financing have avenues, facilitation for whistleblowing? Any best practices? I think, Ibrahim, you might want to jump in on that.
I'm sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Yes, indeed. I think, to be fair, there is procedurally the same kind of procedure to reporting corruption in development financing as in climate financing. But what we have tried to do at the GCF is to elaborate a comprehensive protected reporting mechanism. So ideally, what this would mean is that not only do we have accredited entities who are working in communities, but we also leverage on civil society and on community-based CSOs, particularly, who can then support local beneficiary communities in bringing forward complaints. This is going to be vital going forward, particularly when our portfolio matures and we have a certain level of implementation. Um, we're looking also to utilize local languages and to just make it easier for communities to report. But I do encourage anyone interested to have a look at our policy and the protections that it seeks to provide. But just on the question of tone at the top, I think it's equally important, as Rennie alluded to look at what they call the mood in the middle and the buzz at the bottom, because all all sections of society need to be engaged in the process of building integrity, and that's where institutions play an important role. But happy to share more about our whistleblower policy if you would like. Thank you.
And to you, Michael.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes, I guess
yes,
I
go
would
ahead.
add, first of all, it is not just a matter of legislation. Certainly in terms
Okay.
of lobbying, don't rely on that. If you're a donor or a recipient, there is a lot that you can do administratively within your organization to control corruption risks that do not require law reform. Law reform can take a very long time, as can any kind of law around climate change, which we're all seeing as well. In terms of tone at the top, I think this is a difficult question, and certainly I agree with what others have said that you can't just rely on that, but it does depend on the kind of jurisdiction and regime that's in place. So I think it was very formative. Some of you may know the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. So Azerbaijan was, I think, the first country to be approved for that. It was about to be kicked out, but in the end, it left of its own accord, so it would not be kicked out. And the reason that happened is that the government really constrained civil society space in a way that left the EITI committee unhappy about the ability to hear independent voices. So I'm not saying that it's easy. It does really matter where you live. And in democracies, it is certainly easier for people other than leaders to make their voices heard. But as we know in democracies, so the examples in my case all have, in the report I wrote, they're all from democracies. And in all of those cases, there was really some compromising going on that actually excluded people. And then just before I hand over to others, I think that's a very interesting last question about climate finance impacts. I think there is a really big difference between measuring the money and measuring greenhouse gases. And unfortunately, the people who have expertise in both often don't get together, and they find it very difficult to speak that same language. If you work in anti-corruption, it can be very clear often when a contract has been compromised and, a bribe has changed hands, or, you can trace the money flow. But I think in terms of actually seeing the impact on greenhouse gases, did this project do anything? Or was the infrastructure created under an adaptation fund, for example? Is it actually inferior because of corruption? That can be very difficult to prove. It's not easy. Thank you.
Yes, it does have its challenges. And one, it is said that because the climate finance impacts are less concrete, it is harder to monitor whether the money spent is used for its purported aims. What are your views? The other thing, too, is that adaptation, basically, in terms of indicators of success, it does take some time for you to really assess those. So there are challenges. How do we deal with that?
I guess that's why I mentioned earlier that time is key. And also something that is really relevant, and then I'm going to come back to this simple point, is your procurement process, because here is the key. In the first 3 stages of procurement processes where prohibited practices can take place. So if you're going to award a contractor for developing a climate financing-oriented operation or technical assistance, you have to have prior an analysis of what are the costs. So they have to be really, really estimated in the reality of a country in which you're going to work, or if you're going to have that technical assistance or the company that has to have international or come from an international country develop the project in your own country. So that was going to be highly costly. So for me, it's super relevant, and the stage of procurement and the stage of analysis of how much is going to cost. It's simple. If it's going to cost $100, but and the market and all the analysis states it's $100, but you're paying $150. So it's just as simple that something is going wrong, and you have a red flag that you have to address. And from another perspective, sometimes it's really relevant for development banks to protect the development objective. We put so much effort in projects that sometimes having in the middle of a project some things raised, what we will do is put all our effort so that the population receives that project. I think that sometimes development banks are taking not into consideration that they put so much effort for the population to receive projects, to address, to mitigate all of the prohibited practices, because mainly we do, yes, monitor, but what we aim at is the population in the end receives the project, the objective of development. So we learn the hard way sometimes, but I think that simple steps that will lead takeaways for people today from our conference, that they are simple, and that Ibrahim, Michael, and you, Doctor, have already mentioned. Thank you very much.
And just so they don't feel as if they have a role, the direct question is, what is the role of civil society, if any, in ensuring that the benefits of climate finance gets to the communities in need? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
Actually,
go ahead.
If I can just add, so in the paper we wrote, we have a couple of examples where civil society organizations did some terrific freedom of information request work that really exposed duplicity and complicity around, in this case, it was actually private firms trying to influence government ministers. So I think in a way it's unfair on CSOs that they have to bear this burden of trying to show that lobbying laws don't work very well, and that there are these forces trying to, at the very least, improperly influence climate policy. But I think in a way that's what CSOs have signed themselves up for, and we need you and the world needs you.
And if I may add, yes, indeed. So the GCF model is built on active civil society engagement, and we default on complete transparency in information sharing, and that's one major feature of our work. But let me also just quickly mention, in terms of the impact of projects, that our independent evaluation unit conducts very detailed studies and reviews on the impact of projects funded by the GCF. And I've shared in the chat a link to one of those evaluations that was done on projects in small island developing states, for any interest.
Ibrahim, in the region, as you know, we have two regional implementing entities, the Caribbean Development Bank, or host, and the Climate Change Center. And we also have a national implementing entity in the Climate Office of the Government of Antigua. At the level of the CDB, one would expect that by the fact of the business they're in, corruption is dealing with those issues, it's not a new kid on the block. But certainly for institutions like ours, the center, the Antiguan institution, and with the push for CBOs basically to become part of this exercise, there's a tremendous capacity issue that needs to be addressed. As the bank, is the GCF basically have on their agenda, helping these institutions to get the type at the level of capacity that would allow them to deal effectively with this issue?
Really important question. Thank you very much. I think the issue goes right back to the accreditation process. We are committed to encouraging the accreditation of more and more direct access entities and national entities. And in that process, we share our fiduciary standards for the bank, which include integrity standards as well. And what we have set out to do is to apply a differentiated approach to how we deal with international access entities as different from how we deal with direct access entities. There's a lot more hand-holding required for the latter. And one of the things we've done is set up a peer-to-peer learning platform where we create the opportunity for protected or trusted learning and shared learning from peers. I see that our time is up, but I could go into a bit more detail if you would like, Dr. Trotz. Otherwise,
Well, Ibrahim, I actually asked that question hoping that you would commit to build the capacity for these institutions to use that exciting tool that the GCF has developed. I think that this, I think, would be a very important bit of ammunition in our arsenal if we were to go in that direction.
Now, we're coming to the end. But allow me to consult my budget, and then I will come back to
you. Okay. Yeah, we have a few more minutes. Rennie, would you like to?
Yes, just addressing what you mentioned, that COVID left us virtual, so we can unite. As Ibrahim mentioned, I personally is part of a alliance, a P2P alliance supported by GIZ and DCF. And so everyone's welcome to get involved if Caribbean Development Bank, anyone wants to pitch in us virtually. There's no money cost, so we can do so many things virtually and unite ourselves against everything that has to do with prohibited practices, corruption, fraud, and work out for the benefit of our world.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and I hope our host, CDB, along with you, Rennie, would start to get that network going. I think it will serve a great purpose for us in the region. Michael?
No, I just want to say thank you. I think that's a very good note to end on, Rennie. That's right. It's really encouragement to get involved. Thank you.
Ibrahim?
I'll just join Michael to thank Rennie. I think excellent. You know, this is all about collaboration and a mutual support. And I do take your point seriously, Dr. Trotz, and I'll certainly follow up on it.
Thank you, and thank you very much, panel. I think this has been a very informative session. If anything, it shows us in the region not only the importance of addressing this issue, but for us that are actually involved in delivering climate finance in the Caribbean, what are the critical issues that we need to address, and basically to reach out to the areas of expertise as we move forward, so that over time we will have the competence to ensure that corruption does not divert us from the path of providing climate resilience for the Caribbean people and for the Caribbean region. I thank the bank, the CDB, for thinking about insinuating climate finance into this event. I think it's basically a very important initiative, and hopefully lays the groundwork for a cooperative effort between the different entities in the Caribbean to ensure that as a region, we at the end are presented as the gold standard in terms of dealing with climate finance and the integrity of climate finance, and ensuring that we get maximum benefit from the finance that flows in our direction. Thank you very much to our audience, and we look forward to further interactions of this type.
Thank you all.
Right.
Have a great
Goodbye,
day.
all. Right.
Goodbye.